Snow whispered over the valley like a lullaby for a sleepless world. It was one of those bitter winter nights in Maple Ridge, Colorado. The kind of night that tested who you truly were when nobody else was watching. Officer Jake Miller's patrol car rolled slowly down the frozen road, headlights cutting soft golden tunnels through the flurries. The radio buzzed with low static, the town calm and half asleep. Only the hum of the heater and the occasional crunch of tires interrupted the quiet. Jake was a man accustomed to silence. At 37, he carried both discipline and sorrow in equal measure. Years of service had given him a careful posture, a patience that never completely hid the ache in his eyes. He had lost friends, cases, and once, a woman who had taken his heart and vanished like smoke. His K9 partner Rex, a purebred German shepherd with years on the force, sat in the back seat, his sharp eyes scanning the snowy streets, ears twitching to every small sound. The winter air outside was thin and bright, the moon like a watchful ghost above the mountains. It was supposed to be a routine patrol, a lonely circuit through shuttered shops, sleeping houses, and the heart of a town held still by cold. But sometimes fate picked quiet nights to change a man's life. At the far end of Main Street, just beyond the old corner store, a small shape stood under a flickering street lamp. Jake slowed instinctively, squinting through the snowfall. It wasn't an animal, though the size at first suggested it might be. It was a boy, barely 8 years old, skinny arms hugged around a bundle of towel and fur. He held a worn piece of cardboard with shaky letters drawn in thick black marker. Puppy for sale. Jake's brows pulled together. No child should be outside alone this late. He parked the cruiser at the curb and stepped out, his boots crunching on ice. The cold bit through his gloves as he approached the figure. The beam of his flashlight fell gently across the boy's face. Angelic, flushed pink from the wind, with eyes that seemed too old for his small body. "Hey there, buddy," Jake said softly, careful not to startle him. "It's freezing. Where are your folks?" The boy looked up, blinking snowflakes off his lashes. "My name's Ethan, sir." His voice trembled like wind through brittle branches. "My mom's in the hospital. She's real sick. I'm just trying to sell Max here." He lifted the puppy, a shivering German shepherd, barely a few weeks old, wrapped in a faded towel. Jake's throat tightened. Compassion welled up before reason. "You're out here all alone? In this weather?" Ethan nodded. "Mom says medicine costs a lot, and they won't help unless we pay something. I thought maybe, if somebody bought Max..." He didn't finish. His eyes dropped to the puppy, who let out a small whine. A lump rose in Jake's chest. He had seen pain before, but this felt different. Smaller, purer, and harder to bear. He knelt so he could meet the boy's gaze. "How old are you, Ethan?" 8. "And your mom's name?" "Sarah Turner," the boy said quietly. "She used to work at the diner by the highway." The name struck like a sudden gust of wind, stealing Jake's breath. Sarah Turner. His mind scrambled. Common name, he told himself. Coincidence. Yet his pulse had already quickened. Snow fell thicker now, brushing their shoulders in white dust. Rex padded silently out of the open car door, ears pricked. The big dog approached with unusual calm, sniffed Ethan's boots and the puppy's fur, then sat beside the boy with surprising gentleness. Jake blinked. Rex never trusted easily. "That's strange," he murmured. "He usually takes his time with strangers." Ethan let a faint smile touch his chapped lips. "Animals like me," he said with quiet certainty. Jake studied him in the beam of his flashlight, the thin layer of snow collecting in his hair, the bright hazel eyes, the small hand gripping that cardboard sign as though it were a lifeline. Everything about this child pulled at something buried deep inside him. He cleared his throat. "Ethan," he said softly, "how about this? I'll buy you both some hot chocolate, and I'll pay you for the puppy. But you keep Max, that's the deal." Ethan shook his head quickly. "I can't, sir. Mom says we don't beg." "You're not begging," Jake replied gently, pulling his wallet from his jacket. "I'm helping a brave kid take care of his mom. That's what good folks do." As he drew out the bills, a streak of silver caught the corner of his eye. A pendant hung around Ethan's neck, an oval charm swinging softly in the cold air. When light touched it, Jake's heart stopped. The same engraving. 2 tiny interlocked wings with initials S and J at their center. His voice came out barely above a whisper. "That necklace, where did you get it?" Ethan glanced down and touched it gently. "It was my mom's," he said. "She told me it used to belong to someone special." Jake couldn't breathe for a moment. Memories clawed their way up. The smile of a woman with wind-tossed hair. The laughter that once chased through his patrol car when she rode beside him. The promise she had made before disappearing from his world. I see," he managed, forcing calm. "Which hospital is she in?" "St. Mary's by the river." Room 12, I think. Jake nodded slowly, pressing a $100 bill into the boy's mittened hand. Hold on to that. Get your mom something warm. And keep Max, he needs you. Ethan's eyes glistened. Thank you, officer. Jake ruffled the boy's hair, the gesture heavier than he expected. He watched as the child trudged down the snowy street, the puppy tucked securely against his chest, footprints fading behind him. Rex gave a soft whine. Jake whispered to the dog, "Yeah, boy. I felt it too." Back in the driver's seat, he stared at the snow swirling like smoke outside his windshield. The world felt shifted, off balance, as if ghosts suddenly had names again. His gaze drifted to his glove box, where his own memories slept, even one pendant long sealed away. "Rex," he murmured, voice thick. "Either the universe just played a cruel trick, or it's giving me a second chance." The snow outside deepened, muffling the town in silence. Somewhere in that silence, a woman named Sarah Turner lay in a hospital bed, and fate was reaching through time to tap on Jake Miller's heart. By the time he returned to his small cabin at the edge of Maple Ridge, the storm had thickened into a swirling curtain. The yellow porch light glowed faintly through the blizzard, throwing soft shadows across the yard. He parked, turned off the engine, and sat for a long moment with the sound of cooling metal ticking beneath the hood. Rex rested his muzzle on the seat, watching with gentle eyes. Jake patted the dog's head without speaking and finally stepped out into the cold. Inside, warmth greeted him. The scent of burning pine, worn leather, and old memories. His cabin was simple, lived in, filled with objects that told stories he never wanted to forget. Above the mantel hung framed medals, photos of officers long gone, and a single picture turned backward. He placed his keys on the table beside his badge, walked through the narrow hallway, and stopped at the door he rarely opened anymore. The hinges groaned softly. Inside was a room more shrine than bedroom. Boxes stacked neatly, labels reading case files, personal, and one marked simply Sarah. He opened it with careful fingers. Inside lay the traces of another life. Coffee shop receipts, a photograph of two smiling faces against a summer sky, and finally, a small velvet box. When he lifted the lid, his pulse thundered in his ears. There it was, her pendant's twin. 2 silver wings, initials S and J entwined. The firelight made it shimmer faintly, like the memory of a heartbeat. Jake sat on the bed, staring, and for the first time in years let the ache show on his face. Sarah Turner, his Sarah, had vanished without a trace almost a decade earlier. Back then she had been 27, fierce and brave, a journalist chasing corruption that could swallow ordinary people whole. He remembered her on the courthouse steps, teasing him for being the serious hero who never laughs. He remembered the day she promised she'd come back safe, and he remembered the week everything fell apart. The Black Canyon Syndicate investigation collapsing overnight, witnesses disappearing, evidence burned, and Sarah gone as though eaten by the dark. Now somehow, a boy with her eyes and his pendant stood under a street lamp in the snow. Jake leaned forward, elbows on his knees, the matching pendant glinting between his fingers. "You can't be gone," he whispered into the quiet cabin. "You just found a way to come back." Outside, the storm howled across the ridge, but inside, beneath the flicker of the wood stove, something long frozen in him began, just barely, to thaw. Now, after all this time, her name had returned to him through a small boy in the snow. Rex nudged his knee softly, whining. Jake sighed, running a hand through the dog's fur. "You felt it too, didn't you?" he murmured. "That kid, he's connected to her somehow." He stood and moved to the window. Outside, the snow glowed faintly under the moonlight. The world felt suspended, silent, waiting. Somewhere beyond the trees, in the heart of town, Sarah Turner was alive, and someone didn't want that truth known. Jake couldn't rest. He grabbed his coat and reopened the case files from the old investigation. Names, reports, phone records, all still incomplete. One name stood out. Agent Thomas Cole, the federal liaison who had abruptly closed the case. The same man who later transferred out of the state without warning. As he pieced through the fragments, a soft whimper from Rex pulled his attention back. The dog was staring at the door, ears pry-cricked. Jake frowned, reaching for his gun. But after a few 10 seconds, there was nothing, only the sound of the wind howling through the trees. He holstered the weapon, glancing once more at the pendant before finally sitting down. Sleep did not come easily that night. The fire burned low, and the storm outside was whispered the name he had tried so long to forget. Sarah. At that very moment, across town, St. Mary's Hospital glowed faintly under the dim orange of the parking lights. Snow piled on the roof and railings, muffling the city's heartbeat. Inside, Ethan sat beside a narrow bed in the room 12, holding his mother's frail hand. The boy's eyelids drooped with exhaustion, but he refused to leave. Sarah Turner lay against the pillow, her skin pale against the white sheets. Her once bright auburn hair had dulled to chestnut, and the lines of struggle marked her delicate face. She wore a faded hospital gown, and an IV dripped quietly beside her. Ethan leaned forward, his voice small but full of pride. "Mom, the officer who bought Max today was really kind. He said I could keep him. He gave me money for your medicine." Sarah stirred, eyes fluttering open. For a moment she looked confused, as though awakening from a deep, haunted dream. "An officer," she whispered weakly. "What was his name?" "I think Jake," Ethan replied. The name hit her like a lightning strike. Her eyes filled with tears before she could stop them. "Jake," she breathed, her voice trembling. "Jake Miller?" Ethan nodded slowly. "Yeah, he had a big dog named Rex. Max liked him." Sarah turned her face toward the ceiling, tears sliding silently down her temples. Her chest rose and fell unevenly as memories she'd buried for years crashed through her like a breaking wave. "Jake, you were never supposed to find me." She pressed a trembling hand to her lips, trying to steady her breathing. The past she had hidden from her son, from everyone, was coming back to life. Ethan frowned. "Mom, are you okay?" Sarah forced a small smile. "I'm fine, sweetheart. I'm just tired." She squeezed his hand gently. "That officer, he sounds like a good man." "He was," Ethan said. "He looked sad, though, like he missed someone." Sarah's heart ached. Maybe he did. Her voice cracked. Some people spend their whole lives missing someone. Outside, snow gathered quietly on the window ledge. The night nurse passed the doorway, glancing in to check the monitors. Nurse Helen, a woman in her early 50s with kind eyes and streaks of gray in her hair, had worked at St. Mary's for decades. She smiled softly at Ethan. "You should rest a bit, dear. Your mom needs her strength, too." "Yes, ma'am," Ethan said politely. Helen patted his shoulder before continuing down the hallway, humming faintly. When she disappeared around the corner, the faint hum of the monitors returned, steady, rhythmic, almost comforting. But beyond the walls of room 12, in the parking lot below, a dark figure sat motionless in a black SUV. The man was in his 40s, thick-set, wearing a black winter coat and gloves. His name was Victor Hale, a former intelligence operative now working as private security, or so their court said. He had been following Sarah for months, under orders from someone higher. Through the fogged windshield, Hale watched the hospital window light up, then dim. He lifted a camera, snapped a few photos, and typed a short message into his encrypted phone. "Subject confirmed. Contact with unknown male officer imminent." Then he reclined in the driver's seat, waiting. Snow continued to fall, silent and endless. Back at Jake's cabin, dawn finally crept over the horizon, staining the snow in shades of pale gold. Jake hadn't slept. The pendant lay on the table beside his untouched coffee. The pieces were fitting together in ways that terrified him. Sarah was alive, and Ethan, the boy with her eyes, was more than just a stranger's son. He rubbed his face, exhaustion written deep into every line. "If she's alive," he murmured to Rex, "then someone's been lying to us for a very long time." Rex tilted his head as if agreeing. Jake stood, holstering his badge again. The time for wondering was over. The storm of the past had returned, and this time he wasn't going to run from it. He grabbed his coat and stepped out into the morning light, snow crunching under his boots as he headed for the cruiser. The engine growled to life, echoing across the frozen silence. He was going to St. Mary's. The sky over Maple Ridge was a pale gray blanket, heavy with unshed snow. The town moved slowly under the weight of another winter morning. But Officer Jake Miller's cruiser cut through the mist with quiet determination. His breath fogged the windshield as the heater hummed low. Every mile toward St. Mary's Hospital tightened the knot in his chest. He had spent 7 years believing Sarah Turner was gone, and the other name, spoken by a child who could have been his own, had rekindled a hope he wasn't sure he was ready to face. The hospital appeared through the fog, a tall brick building with faded signage and weary windows that reflected a colorless sky. Jake parked near the entrance, brushing snow off his coat before stepping out. His navy winter sheriff's jacket bore the gold badge of Maple Ridge County, and his holster sat firm at his hip. He wasn't here as a lawman now, though. He was here as a man haunted by unfinished love and unanswered questions. Rex sat in the back seat, alert but calm, watching his partner go with intelligent eyes. "Stay," Jake murmured. The German shepherd tilted his head but obeyed. Inside, the air was warm and sterile, scented faintly of disinfectant and coffee. Nurses moved briskly through the halls, and the intercom occasionally buzzed with room updates. Jake walked to the reception desk where a middle-aged woman with glasses perched low on her nose greeted him. "Can I help you, officer?" "I'm looking for a patient, Sarah Turner," he said, trying to steady his voice. The woman scanned her computer, then looked up. Room 12, East Wing. Visiting hours just started. Thank you, Jake said softly. He followed the signs down the long corridor, his boots echoing on the polished floor. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered intermittently, casting a rhythm of light and shadow that made his pulse race. As he neared room 12, he saw through the glass window a small boy curled up in a chair beside a hospital bed, his arms around a sleeping puppy. It was Ethan. The child's hair fell across his forehead, his face peaceful now in slumber. Jake hesitated at the door, heart pounding. He reached for the handle but stopped when he saw movement inside. The woman in the bed stirred, her frail hand brushing the blanket aside. Sarah Turner turned her head slowly, and her eyes met his. For a heartbeat, everything stopped. The hum of machines, the buzz of lights, the world itself seemed to vanish into silence. Her face was paler, thinner than he remembered. But her eyes, those deep, luminous eyes, were exactly the same. Recognition struck them both like a thunderclap. Jake froze in the doorway, unable to move. Sarah's lips parted in shock, a small gasp escaping her throat. "Jake!" she whispered, the name trembling on her tongue as if it had waited years to be spoken again. Jake took a hesitant step forward. "Sarah, my God, it's really you." Tears welled in her eyes, spilling quietly down her cheeks. She looked toward Ethan, then back to Jake and quickly pressed a finger to her lips. "Please," she whispered urgently. "Not here. They still watch me." Jake stopped, confusion flickering through his features. "Watch you? Who?" Sarah glanced toward the hallway, fear shadowing her expression. "They never stopped," she said softly, her voice breaking. "After the Black Canyon case, after you vanished from that assignment, they told me to disappear, or they'd make sure our child didn't survive. I had no choice." Jake's breath caught. "Our child." The words hit like a bullet he didn't see coming. He looked at Ethan, the boy, sleeping soundly, innocent and unaware of the storm around him. Every piece of the puzzle fell into place in a single shattering moment. He swallowed hard. "You're saying Ethan?" Sarah nodded, her tears now silent but endless. "He's yours, Jake." Jake stepped closer, his eyes locked on hers. "Why didn't you tell me? I searched for you for years." "I couldn't," she interrupted, shaking her head weakly. "They were watching me everywhere. They said if I tried to contact you, they'd end it for both of us. So I hid. I changed names, moved towns, everything. But now they found me again." Jake's heart pounded in his ears. He reached out, gripping the side of her bed. "Who's they, Sarah? Who's still after you?" Before she could answer, the door creaked softly. Jake turned sharply, his hand instinctively resting on his holster. Standing there was a young nurse in light blue scrubs, her auburn hair tied neatly in a ponytail. She looked to be in her late 20s with freckles dusting her pale skin and a kind but curious expression. Her name tag read Megan Lewis. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, sensing the tension in the room. "Did I interrupt something?" Jake straightened slightly. "No, it's fine. I'm a friend of the family." Megan smiled politely, though her green eyes lingered on him for a moment longer than necessary. "I thought so. Ethan told me last night a police officer helped him in the snow. That was very kind of you." Jake nodded. "He's a brave kid." Megan's voice softened. "He really is. He's been by his mother's side every night. Never leaves even when we ask him to rest." She adjusted Sarah's IV and lowered her voice slightly. "You should know there's been someone outside the hospital for days now. Black SUV, tinted windows. I've reported it, but no one's followed up." Jake's eyes darkened. "Thank you for telling me. I'll look into it." Megan gave him a brief knowing glance, the look of someone who had already seen too much but knew when to stay quiet. "Be careful, officer," she said softly, then slipped out of the room. As the door closed behind her, Jake turned back to Sarah. "She's right," he said grimly. "Someone is watching. I saw that same car when I drove up." Sarah nodded weakly. "I know. They want to make sure I never speak again. I still have something they couldn't destroy. Files. Proof. But I can't keep running, Jake. I'm too tired." Jake reached for her hand, gripping it tightly. "You're not running anymore," he said. "Not alone. I'm here now, and I'm not letting them hurt you or Ethan again." Her lips trembled into a faint, tearful smile. "You always said that," she whispered. Back then, before everything fell apart, Jake brushed a strand of hair from her face. "And I meant it then. I mean it now." From the chair, Ethan stirred and blinked sleepily. "Mom," he murmured. Then, seeing Jake, his expression brightened. "Hey, you came back." Jake managed a soft smile, though his voice was thick. "I told you I would." Sarah squeezed his hand once, silently, pleading with him not to reveal the truth just yet. He nodded subtly. Ethan didn't need to know. Not until they were safe. Outside, the low rumble of an engine drifted through the window. Jake's instincts sharpened instantly. He stepped closer to the curtain and peeked outside. Sure enough, the black SUV was still parked across the street, engine idling, a figure barely visible behind the wheel. Jake's jaw tightened. They're closer than I thought. He turned back to Sarah and Ethan. Get some rest, he said quietly. I'll be around. Sarah nodded, her eyes filled with unspoken fear and gratitude. Jake left the room, walking calmly down the corridor. But inside his blood was boiling. Whatever threat had haunted Sarah all these years, whatever shadows had stolen their time together, was about to be brought into the light. And this time he wasn't walking away. The air inside St. Mary's was still when Jake returned the next day. Snow had stopped falling, leaving the streets blanketed in an untouched white that gleamed beneath the morning sun. Yet despite the calm outside, his heart carried a storm. The conversation from the previous night echoed in his mind, Sarah's fearful whisper, "They still watch me," and the haunting realization that Ethan was his son. When Jake entered room 12, Sarah was awake. She sat upright, her thin fingers wrapped around a cup of warm tea. The hospital gown hung loosely on her frame, but her eyes, though tired, had regained a trace of strength. Ethan was out in the hallway with Max, the puppy, feeding him pieces of a sandwich a nurse had given him. Jake pulled up a chair beside her bed. "You said you had no choice," he began softly. "I need to know what happened after you disappeared, Sarah." "Everything." Sarah exhaled, her breath trembling. She looked out the window for a moment before speaking. "After you were reassigned from the Black Canyon Syndicate case, I kept investigating on my own," she said, her voice low. "You remember I was writing that exposé? I'd found documents linking senior law enforcement officials to the smuggling network. They weren't just turning a blind eye, Jake. They were partners in it. I was going to expose everything." Jake's jaw tightened. "Who were they?" "I didn't know all their names then, but I had proof. Photos, files, bank transactions. Before I could publish, someone broke into my apartment. 2 men wearing tactical masks. They told me they worked for someone called the Broker. When they found out I was pregnant, everything changed." She paused, her eyes glistening with tears. "They said if I didn't disappear, they'd kill the baby. They took my laptop, all my notes, and left me unconscious in Arnold's storage unit outside Denver. When I woke up, there was a single note. If you want your child to live, leave." Jake sat frozen, fists clenched against his knees. "You went into hiding. I had to. I called an old friend in the city, Dr. Laura Hensley, a retired obstetrician. She helped me give birth in secret, used fake hospital papers so no one would trace me. I became Sarah Turner, a waitress. Just another single mother no one would question." She gave a weak laugh that sounded more like sorrow. "Every day I looked over my shoulder, waiting for someone to come for us." Jake's voice was, and they did. She nodded. "When Ethan turned 6, I noticed a man watching the diner where I worked. He never came inside, just sat in his car for hours. I thought I was paranoid, but then strange things started happening. Letters missing from my mailbox, someone paying my rent anonymously. And a few months ago, when I got sick and ended up here, someone already knew. My bills were paid before I even saw the invoice." Jake frowned. "Someone paid your hospital bills before Sarah could answer." The door opened and Megan Lewis stepped in holding a clipboard. Today, she looked more alert, her auburn ponytail pulled tighter, her blue scrubs crisp against her small frame. "Good morning," she said gently, giving both of them a cautious smile. "I've been checking through the payment records you asked me about." She lowered her voice, stepping closer. "It's strange. The payments came from a man named Daniel Cole, listed as a federal liaison." Jake's eyes darkened. "Agent Cole," he muttered. Megan blinked. "You know him?" Jake leaned back in his chair, every muscle tensing. "He worked with Maduring the Black Canyon operation. He was supposed to oversee evidence handling until everything went wrong. After the case collapsed, he transferred out, said he was moving to private security." Sarah's fingers trembled around her cup. "Jake. He's the one who came to my apartment that night. I remember his voice now. He called me by my full name. Sarah Henderson, my maiden name. He knew everything." Jake's pulse surged. "He's behind this. He's been tracking you. Maybe trying to find whatever evidence you hid." Megan stepped closer, her brow furrowed. "I shouldn't be hearing this, but if what you're saying is true, you're not safe here. Hospitals keep everything digital now. Anyone with access can find your location in seconds." Sarah looked terrified. "What do we do?" Jake stood, his mind already shifting into the tactical mode he hadn't used in years. "First, we move you somewhere secure, somewhere off the grid. I'll handle the rest." Megan hesitated before speaking. "There's an old storage facility behind the east wing, unused since the last renovation. I have the keys. No one goes there, not even the janitors. You could stay there until you figure out what's next." Jake gave her a look of gratitude. "You're risking your job." Megan shrugged faintly. "Then I guess I'm in it now. As Megan slipped out to prepare, Jake turned back to Sarah. Her eyes searched his face with a mix of love, fear, and regret. "You should hate me," she whispered. "I took your son, your future, everything." Jake shook his head slowly. "You saved his life. You did what you had to. But now it's my turn to protect both of you." Sarah's lips trembled as tears slid down her cheeks. "You don't know how much I wanted to believe that day would come," she said softly. The door opened again and Ethan peeked in. "Mom, Mr. Jake." He was still holding Max, the puppy, wagging his little tail. "Is everything okay?" Jake forced a calm smile. "Everything's fine, buddy. We're just figuring out how to get you and your mom someplace safe." Ethan frowned slightly. "Safe from who?" Jake crouched beside him. "Just some people who don't like good guys. But don't worry, I've got Rex outside and he doesn't let bad guys get close." Ethan's face brightened at the mention of Rex. "Can we see him later?" Jake smiled faintly. "You will soon." Sarah watched the two of them, father and son, without a word. The resemblance was impossible to ignore now. The same eyes, the same stubborn kindness. For years, she had shielded Ethan from the truth to keep him safe. But seeing them together now, she realized something she hadn't dared to believe in a long time. Maybe fate hadn't been cruel after all. Maybe it had simply been waiting. Jake turned back to Sarah. "You said you had proof. Do you still have it?" She nodded slowly. "Part of it. The files they didn't find. I hid them on a USB drive sealed in a hollow frame inside one of Ethan's old picture books. They probably think it's gone." Jake exhaled in relief. "That's enough to start." Before they could say more, Megan returned. "The room's ready," she whispered. "If you go now, no one will notice." Jake nodded, helping Sarah sit up carefully. Ethan took her hand, guiding her with quiet pride. They moved down the hallway, Megan leading them through a side exit. The air outside was sharp with cold, and the hospital lights flickered behind them like distant stars. As they passed the parking lot, Jake's eyes flicked toward the row of vehicles. The black SUV was gone, but deep down, he knew that didn't mean safety. It only meant the hunt had begun again. He placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "We'll get through this," he said firmly. "Together." Sarah looked up at him, eyes glimmering. "You still believe that?" Jake nodded once. "I have to." Behind them, snow began to fall again, soft and relentless, covering their footprints as if trying to erase the pain of the past. The storm outside had quieted, but inside Jake Miller's cabin, the air felt heavy with tension and unfinished stories. Snow gathered along the windowsills, muting the world in a hush of white. It had been 2 days since he moved Sarah and Ethan here under Megan's discreet guidance. The hospital's shadow had been replaced by this sanctuary. Small, isolated, but safe, at least for now. Jake sat at his worn wooden desk, the dim lamplight reflecting off old case files scattered across its surface. The folders were labeled in fading ink, Black Canyon Syndicate Confidential. Most of the documents bore the seal of the Department of Justice, but many pages were missing, ripped out or replaced with blank sheets. His jaw tightened as he flipped through another folder. Half the evidence logs were redacted. Rex lay by the fireplace, his amber eyes occasionally flicking toward the door, ears twitching at the faintest sound. On the couch, Ethan sat cross-legged beside the puppy, Max, who noted clumsily on an old leather glove. The boy giggled quietly, his laughter echoing like fragile sunlight through the somber room. Sarah watched them from the armchair, wrapped in one of Jake's wool blankets. Her cheeks had regained some color, but she still looked fragile, haunted by years of running. Her dark auburn hair fell softly against her shoulders, and every so often she would reach out to brush Ethan's curls aside, her fingers trembling just a little less each day. Jake typed into his computer, his brow furrowed. The files refused to open. "Someone scrubbed the database," he muttered under his breath. "The entire internal report is gone." Sarah looked up. "Can't you recover it?" "I'm trying," Jake replied. "But these deletions weren't random. They used deep-level encryption. Someone with clearance did this deliberately." He leaned back, rubbing the back of his neck. "I need help from someone still inside the system." Sarah's gaze softened. "You mean Harris?" Jake nodded. "Yeah, Deputy Ryan Harris. He's been with the department 15 years. Ex-military police like me. Mid-40s, big heart, bigger temper, the kind of man who never learned how to give up." He hesitated, glancing toward the frost-covered window. "If I reach out, I need to know he's not compromised." Sarah shifted uneasily. "Can you trust anyone after what happened?" Jake met her eyes. "Harris saved my life once. That has to count for something." He picked up his phone, hesitated a moment, then dialed a private number. The line clicked. A rough voice answered, deep and familiar. "Miller, it's been a long time." "Too long," Jake said quietly. "Listen, I'm reopening the Black Canyon files. I think Cole's still operating under the radar. I need the original data from the 2015 raid before the redactions. A pause. Then Harris spoke again. Lower, cautious. That's classified now. I'll see what I can dig up. But you didn't hear this from me. Jake smiled faintly, appreciated. Be careful, Harris added. Word is Cole's resurfaced with private contractors. If he's involved again, you're not chasing just corruption anymore. You're chasing ghosts, the call ended. Jake leaned back, his mind spinning. Across the room, Ethan and Max had fallen asleep on the rug. Rex curled protectively beside them. The sight melted something inside him. For the first time in years, he saw what peace might look like. 2 dogs, 1 boy, and a fragile stillness that felt almost like family. Sarah broke the silence. He looks happy, she whispered. Jakey turned to her. He deserves to be. Both of you do. Her lips trembled into a faint smile. It feels strange being here again. Like the past never ended, just paused. He hesitated. Maybe it's time it finally continues. Before she could answer, the computer beeped softly. A new message appeared on the screen. It was from an encrypted channel. Harris's work signature embedded in the code. Jake opened it carefully. A list of archived file names scrolled across the monitor, most labeled restricted access, but one caught his attention. Case X1 witness account Sarah Henderson DAM-PP4. He froze. Sarah, he said quietly. There's a video statement. Your testimony. Her eyes widened. I never recorded one. Jake frowned. Then someone used your name to fake it. He clicked play. The video opened on a dark room. Grainy footage. A woman, her face blurred, spoke mechanically. I, Sarah Henderson, fabricated all claims regarding law enforcement involvement. I regret my actions. Jake slammed the laptop shut. They doctored your confession. That's how they buried the case. Sarah's face went pale. They destroyed everything. My reputation, the truth. Jake reached across the table, taking her hand. Then we bring it back. Just then, a faint metallic click drew his attention. He turned toward the hallway where Ethan had disappeared earlier. The boy's voice piped up from the next room. Mr. Jake, I think your computer's doing something weird. Jake walked over, finding Ethan sitting in front of another monitor in the study. On the screen was an old photo, grainy, but clear enough to recognize. It was Jake and Sarah, both in uniform, smiling under a parade banner, his arm wrapped around her shoulders. Ethan looked between the photo and his mother, confusion dawning. Mom, is that you? Sarah's breath caught. She stepped closer, tears filling her eyes. Yes, sweetheart. That was a long time ago. Jake knelt beside him. Your mom and I worked together once. We were partners. Ethan studied the photo again. You look happy, he said softly, like you knew each other forever. Sarah smiled through her tears. It felt that way. The boy looked up at Jake. So you were a hero too? Jake chuckled quietly. Your mom was the real hero. Ethan's eyes glimmered. Then I guess I'm lucky, he said simply. For a moment, the world shrank to that small cabin. The warmth of the fire, the soft snoring of dogs, the glow of the past blending with the fragile hope of the present. But beyond those walls, the storm that had paused was beginning to stir again. Jake's phone vibrated. Another message from Harris flashed on the screen. You were right. Cole's files traced back to internal servers. Someone inside the department is feeding him data. Jake looked at the message, then at Sarah. They're watching everything, even me. Sarah's eyes filled with fear again. Then what do we do? He looked toward the sleeping boy, and the dogs curled around him. We keep them safe, whatever it takes. Outside, the wind rose once more, carrying the soft howl of winter through the pines. Inside, Rex lifted his head, ears twitching, as if he too sensed the return of danger. Jake closed the laptop, extinguished the lamp, and sat back in silence, his mind already working through the next move. The ghosts of Black Canyon had found their way home, and this time Jake Miller was ready for them. Night fell heavy over Maple Ridge, painting the snow-covered landscape in hues of silver and blue. Inside Jake Miller's cabin, the fire had burned low, its glow flickering weakly against the frosted windows. The quiet should have felt safe, but Jake's instincts refused tourist. He sat at his desk, staring at his phone, waiting for a call from Deputy Harris. Rex dozed near the front door, his ears twitching even in sleep. Sarah was in the kitchen making tea, her arm wrapped in a blanket for warmth, while Ethan sat cross-legged on the rug playing with Max, the puppy wagging his tail beside him. For a fleeting moment, the scene felt like family. Peaceful, fragile, almost normal. But Jake knew peace in his world never lasted long. The phone finally buzzed. He grabbed it immediately. Harris's growly voice came through, hushed but urgent. Jake, I got your files, he said. You were right. The data wasn't deleted randomly. Someone used an internal clearance code, level 5 access. Jake's grip tightened on the phone. Only senior officers have level 5. Exactly, Harris said. And guess whose code it was traced to? Agent Daniel Cole. He's deep inside, Jake. This wasn't cleanup work. He's been pulling strings for years, feeding intel to both sides. Jake exhaled slowly, his gut twisting. So the Bureau's compromised. I'm afraid it's worse than that, Harris replied. Cole's not acting alone. There's someone above him, someone with reach inside the Justice Department itself. You need to move now before they come for you. Jake's voice dropped to a growl. Thanks, old friend. The line went dead. He stood slowly, slipping the phone into his pocket. His expression hardened, eyes flicking toward the window. Snow still fell gently, but the night outside felt charged, electric. Sarah, he called softly. She turned, concern etched in her face. What's wrong? Cohal's behind everything, Jake said. And he's not alone. They know we're digging again. Before Sarah could reply, Rex let out a loud growl, deep and steady. His fur bristled. Jake froze down. He whispered. The German shepherd crept toward the window, muscles tense. Then a glint of light. Crack! The window exploded in a shower of glass. Jake dove forward, tackling Sarah to the ground. The bullet shattered the frame where she had stood seconds earlier. Ethan screamed, clutching Max to his chest. Rex barked furiously, lunging toward the door as Jake shouted, "Get down!" Jake crawled to the side table, pulling his service pistol free. "Stay with Ethan," he ordered. Sarah, trembling, pulled her son behind the couch. Another shot ripped through the curtains, splintering the wall above them. Rex darted toward the front door, barking wildly. Jake followed his line of sight, spotting a shadow moving in the trees beyond the fence line. He aimed, fire daunts missed. The figure ducked and returned fire, bullets thudding into the wood panels. "Who are they?" Sarah cried. "Cohalsmen," Jake said, voice sharp. "They found us." He reached for the radio clipped to his belt, trying to call Harris. Nothing but static. The line was jammed. "Damn it," he muttered. Ethan whimpered. "Mr. Jake, I'm scared." Jake turned, eyes softening for a split second. "You'll be fine, kid. I promise." He grabbed a flashlight and motioned toward the back door. "We have to move. They'll try to flank us." Rex barked again, running ahead. Jake opened the back door and signaled Sarah to go. She clutched Ethan's hand, moving through the snow as quietly as she could. The cold bit at their skin, and the forest loomed ahead, dark and endless. Halfway across the yard, another shot rang out, this one closer. Sarah gasped, stumbling as pain shot through her shoulder. Blood bloomed against the white of her sweater. She collapsed to her knees. "Sarah." Jake sprinted to her side, helping her up. "You're okay. It's a graze." Rex stood over her protectively, snarling toward the treine. The shooter moved again, barely visible under the moonlight. Jake fired 2 quick rounds. One hit a tree, the other forced the shadow to retreat. He turned back to Sarah, pressing his hand against her wound. "You'll be fine, just a scratch." She grimaced but managed a weak smile. "You always said that when it was worse." Jake's eyes softened. "You're not dying on me. Not again." Then headlights cut through the darkness. A vehicle speeding up the snowy road. Jack raised his gun instinctively until he saw the familiar figure behind the wheel. "Megan!" he shouted. The white hospital van skidded to a stop near the fence, and Megan Lewis leaned out the window, her face pale with fear. "Gettin'!" she yelled. I saw the black SUV turn off the main road. "They're right behind me." Jake ushered Sarah and Ethan into the back of the van. Rex and Max jumped in next, both barking nervously. Jake climbed into the passenger seat. "Go!" Megan hit the gas. The van roared forward, sliding over icy ground. Behind them, a pair of headlights appeared, the SUV gaining speed. Bullets cracked against the back door, shattering a taillight. Jake fired through the rear window, aiming at the tires. "Keep straight." "I'm trying," Megan cried, gripping the wheel. Her knuckles turned white. She was shaking but focused, adrenaline turning her fear into resolve. They raced down the snowy mountain road, the forest whipping past in a blur of black and white. Ethan clung to his mother, tears streaking down his cheeks. "Mom, you're bleeding." "I'm fine, sweetheart," Sarah murmured, wincing. She pressed a torn scarf against her wound. Rex licked her arm gently, whining as if trying to comfort her. The SUV kept coming. Jake fired again. This time, the front tire burst and the vehicle skidded off the road, slamming into a snowbank. Megan exhaled shakily. "Is it over?" Jake checked the mirror. The SUV was half buried in the snow, smoke rising from the hood. "For now," he said grimly. "They'll regroup." After several tense minutes, Megan turned onto an old logging trail that wound deep into the woods. "I know a ranger cabin up ahead," she said. "Abandoned since last winter. We can hide there until sunrise." Jake nodded. "Good work." They drove in silence until the road narrowed to a rough path surrounded by trees. The van finally stopped beside a frozen creek. Jake stepped out first, scanning the area, all clear. He opened the back door. Sarah was pale, her shoulder bleeding through the makeshift bandage. Ethan sat beside her, clutching her hand. Rex stood guard at the door, growling low, alert for danger. Jake gently helped Sarah out of the van. "Easy," he said softly. "You're safe now." Sarah leaned against him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Safe for tonight." He guided her into the cabin. Megan had found a single-room shelter with wooden walls and a small stove. Ethan helped set up blankets while Megan found medical supplies in a storage box. The smell of pine and smoke filled the air as the fire crackled to life. When Megan finished bandaging Sarah's shoulder, Jake sat beside her. "You'll heal," he said. "I promise." Sarah looked at him through heavy eyes. And after that, Jake stared into the flames, his voice low and certain. "After that, I end this. Cole, the syndicate, all of it. So you and Ethan can finally live free." Rex, lying near the fire, nudged Sarah's hand with his nose, then licked the edge of the bandage gently. Ethan giggled softly, the sound cutting through the fear. "He likes you, Mom." Sarah smiled weakly, tears glinting in her eyes. "Maybe he knows I owe him one." Jake looked at them both, his heart swelling with determination. The battle wasn't over, but as long as they were breathing, there was still hope. Outside the forest stood silent again, the snow swallowing every trace of the chase. But somewhere beyond those trees, in the shadows, another pair of headlights flickered back to life. The cabin at Pine Hollow sat deep in the forest, half buried under snow and silence. It was a structure of rough-hewn logs and age-darkened wood, forgotten by most travelers. Smoke curled faintly from the chimney, the only sign of life in miles. Inside, the flicker of firelight washed over weary faces. Jake, Sarah, Ethan, and Megan, each trying to breathe in the fragile calm after the storm that had chased them here. Jake had pulled an old wool coat over his sheriff's uniform, his sleeves rolled to the elbows as he stoked the fire. His hair was damp from melted snow, a few silver strands catching the light. Sarah sat propped up on the small bed by the wall, her shoulder bandaged neatly thanks to Megan's care. Ethan and Max, the German shepherd puppy, huddled near the fire, while Rex lay beside them, eyes half-see closed, but alert to every sound. The forest outside was quiet in that deceptive way Jake knew too well. Too still, too heavy, as if something unseen watched from the trees. He had spent years in mountains like these, first as a ranger and later as a sheriff. But tonight, the woods felt less like an ally and more like a ghost waiting to breathe again. Megan stood by the window, her breath fogging the glass. She wore a gray thermal jacket over her scrubs, her auburn hair tied back loosely. She looked younger in the dim light, yet her eyes were steady and cautious. When she turned toward Jake, her voice was low but firm. "We can't stay long. They'll track tire marks from the road." Jake nodded. "I know. We'll rest until sunrise, then move deeper into the ridge." He glanced toward Ethan, who was watching him curiously from beside the fire. The boy's face glowed orange in the firelight, his eyes bright with questions he hadn't yet dared to ask. Finally, he spoke. "Mr. Jake, were you really a police officer before all this?" Jake smiled faintly. "Still am, technically." Ethan frowned thoughtfully. "Mom said you used to help people, that you always kept your word." Sarah's lips curved faintly from the bed. "That's true?" Jake's smile softened, but there was something wistful in his eyes. He sat down near the boy, resting his hands on his knees. "Your mom and I worked together a long time ago. Back then, we thought we could fix everything, stop the bad guys, make the world right again. But the truth is, sometimes the world fights back." Ethan tilted his head. "Did you love her back then?" The question hung in the air like a fragile truth. Sarah looked away, her cheeks flushing faintly. Jake glanced at her, then back at the fire. "Yeah," he said finally, voice quiet. "I did, and I still do." Sarah's eyes shimmered, her lips parting, but she said nothing. For a long moment, the only sound was the fire's slow crackle and the faint rustle of the wind outside. Then Ethan crawled closer to Jake, his small hands clutching the hem off his coat. "Then, can I call you Dad?" Jake froze. He looked into the boy's hopeful face, his heart clenching in a way words couldn't touch. He had imagined this moment for years in dreams, where things had gone differently, where Sarah had never vanished and their child had grown up knowing his name. He swallowed hard, blinking back tears. "Yeah," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Yeah, you can." Ethan's smile broke through the gloom like sunlight-piercing clouds. "Okay, Dad." From the bed, Sarah turned her face toward them, a tear slipping quietly down her cheek. For the first time in a long while, her expression carried something other than fear. It was peace, fragile and full of light. Jake reached out and pulled Ethan into his arms, holding him close. The boy's warmth and heartbeat steadied something deep inside him. Rex shifted by the fire, watching them with soft, intelligent eyes, while Max wagged his tail in quiet approval. But the peace didn't last. Outside, a loud wind swept across the ridge, carrying the faint crunch of boots on snow. Rex's head lifted instantly, ears twitching. His body stiffened, a low growl rumbling from his throat. Jake noticed at once. "Rex," he murmured. The-dog rose, nose to the ground, sniffing the air near the window. Max mimicked him, pawing lightly at the wooden floor. Megan frowned, stepping closer. "What's wrong?" Jake crossed to the window and peered out through the frost. The darkness beyond was dense, but he could see shadows shifting between the trees. "Movement," he whispered. Sarah tensed. "They found us." Jake turned to Megan. "Get Sarah and Ethan ready quietly." Megan nodded and moved to help Sarah stand. The older woman grimaced, clutching her bandaged shoulder, but didn't complain. Ethan hugged Max tightly, eyes wide. Jake grabbed his rifle from the corner, checking the magazine. Rex stood beside him, tail rigid, muscles coiled. Then through the stillness, a faint metallic click echoed, the unmistakable sound of a safety being released. Jake ducked low. "Down!" he hissed. A bullet shattered the front window, splintering wood and spraying glass across the floor. Megan covered Sarah, pulling her toward the back door, while Jack returned fire through the broken frame. The muzzle flash lit the trees, briefly, revealing a figure dressed in dark tactical gear before it vanished again into the snow. "Coe's men," Jake muttered. "He must have tracked us with a drone." Rex barked sharply, then lunged toward the back door, sniffing. Jake turned, following the dog's lead. "This way," he said. "There's a stream bed behind the cabin. We can follow it down." Megan pushed the door open. Andecy air rushed in. Ethan clutched his mother's hand as they stepped into the darkness, Max bounding ahead through the snow. Jake brought up the rear, firing one last warning shot into the woods before closing the door behind him. The group moved quickly, the sound of their boots, muffled by the snow. The forest was alive now with distant shouts and the crunch of pursuit. They reached the frozen stream, its surface glinting under moonlight. "We'll follow this," Jake said. "It'll cover our tracks." Rex trotted ahead, leading the way, nose low and alert. Max followed, occasionally barking in short bursts as if to guide the others. They moved for nearly half an hour through the dark, breath-forming clouds in the cold. Finally, Jake spotted a narrow overhang of rocks that formed a shallow cave. "Here," he said. "We'll wait till dawn." They huddled together inside. Sarah leaned against the wall, breathing shallowly, her strength fading. Megan covered her with another blanket from her pack, whispering reassurance. Ethan nestled between Jake and Sarah, clutching both Rex's fur and Max's tiny paw. The boy looked up at Jake, eyes heavy with exhaustion. "Will they find us?" Jake wrapped an arm around him. "Not o-night." Megan, sitting by the entrance, quietly pulled out her phone. She hesitated only a second before typing a message with trembling thumbs. Location: Pine Hollow Ridge, 4 miles north of the old ranger station. She sent it to one contact, Captain Reed. A man in his late 40s, broad-shouldered, weathered, and honorable. A federal officer with deep gray eyes and the calm of someone who'd seen too much. He had once served alongside Jake years ago, and he owed him a life debt. Megan slipped the phone back into her pocket and exhaled. "Help's coming," she whispered to herself. Outside, the wind began to rise again, scattering snow through the trees. Inside the cave, the small fire flickered, casting long shadows across their faces. For now they were safe, but only barely. Jake kept watch at the entrance, rifle in hand, his gaze locked on the darkness. Rex lay beside him, ears perked, eyes sharp. Behind them, Sarah drifted to sleep with Ethan's head resting on her lap, her hand tangled in his hair. Jake looked back once, his heart heavy with love and resolve. He had finally found the family he'd lost. But to keep them, he'd have to face every shadow still waiting beyond the trees. Dawn broke cold and gray over Pine Hollow, the first weak light filtering through the frost-covered trees. The small cave that had sheltered Jake and his family through the night now lay quiet, the embers of their fire glowing faintly. Jake stood outside, the mountain wind cutting across his face as he scanned the valley below. His jaw was set, his breath visible in the freezing air. This was the day everything would end, or begin again. Behind him, Megan stirred from sleep. Her auburn hair was tangled beneath a beanie, her face pale, but determined. She pulled on her jacket and approached Jake. "Captain Reed responded," she said, holding out her phone. "He's already on his way with a small team. He said he'd meet you at the old freight warehouse near the ridge." Jake nodded, his expression unreadable. "That warehouse used to be part of the Black Canyon evidence storage. Cole will come for it. He needs to finish what he started." Sarah emerged next, bundled in one of Jake's coats, her arm still in a sling, but her eyes sharp and alive again. "You're going after him." Jake turned to her, his tone steady but tender. "I have to. This is the only way we're ever going to be free." Sarah stepped closer, gripping his hand. Just promise me you'll come back. He managed a faint smile. I'll come back. Ethan watched from near the fire, holding Max in his arms. Rex sat beside him, tail still, eyes following Jake as if he too knew what was coming. Can I go with you? Ethan asked softly. Jake crouched down, ruffling the boy's hair. Not this time, kiddo. You stay with your mom and Megan. I need you to protect them while I handle the rest. Ethan's lip quivered, but he nodded bravely. Okay, Dad. Jake stood, checked his weapon, and gave Rex a hand signal. The canine rose immediately, alert and ready. Megan handed Jake a small earpiece and a tracking device. Reed will meet you at 0900 hours, she said. He's bringing 2 men, ex-FBI loyal. You can trust them. Jake gave a curt nod, his eyes hardening with purpose. Let's finish this. He left with Rex at his side, the sound of their footsteps fading into the wind. The old freight warehouse sat in the shadow of the ridge, its steel roof half collapsed, snow piled thick against rusting walls. It had been abandoned for years, a graveyard of broken crates and forgotten evidence. Inside, dust hung in the air like smoke. Jake entered quietly, sweeping his flashlight across the empty expanse. Moments later, a truck rumbled up the slope. From it stepped Captain Reed, a man in his late 40s, broad-shouldered, wearing a black tactical coat. His weathered face carried the authority of years in service, his calm, gray eyes sharp with intelligence. He approached Jake with a firm handshake. You look worse than last time I saw you, he said dryly. Jake managed a faint smirk. You still owe me a beer. Reed's expression turned serious. My men are positioned on the perimeter. Cole's been active one encrypted channels. He'll come for whatever he left behind here. You sure this is where he'll show? Jake's gaze swept the dark corners of the warehouse. He has to. He needs the original Black Canyon files. It's the last loose end that can destroy him. Reed nodded once. Then let's make sure he finds what he's looking for. They set the trap. Jake placed a small steel case, a decoy filled with blank drives, on the central table beneath a hanging light. Reed's men, Agent Fowler and Agent Price, both in tactical gear and mid-30s, took positions behind the pillars. Rex crouched beside Jake, silent, waiting. Hours passed before the sound came, tires crunching on gravel outside. A black SUV stopped near the entrance. The door creaked open, and Daniel Cole stepped out. He was in his 40s now, clean-shaven, hair slicked back, wearing an expensive overcoat that clashed with the cold gray ruin around him. His confident stride and faint smirk carried the arrogance of a man who believed he had already won. Jake Miller, Cole said as he entered, his voice echoing through the empty hall. Still playing the hero, I see. Jake didn't move. You've been running for years, Cole. You could have walked away. Cole chuckled darkly. Walked away after what I built? No, Jake. You think this was about greed or corruption? It was about survival. You were too blind to see how deep it goes. Reed stepped forward from the shadows, his gun raised. End of the line, Cole. Cole's eyes flicked to him, then back to Jake. You brought the captain. How poetic. The man who signed off on my clearance 7 years ago. Reed's expression hardened. And I've spent every day since regretting it, Cole smirked, stepping closer to the light. Do you even know who you're protecting? The syndicate never died. It just changed hands. I climbed higher because I did what needed to be done. And you, Miller, you were the perfect distraction, the loyal fool chasing ghosts. Jake's trigger finger tightened. You betrayed everyone who trusted you, Cole shrugged. I survived. There's a difference. The sound of a second engine roared outside, the unmistakable whine of tires on ice. Jake's blood ran cold. No. Reed turned toward the door. What is it? Jake's voice dropped. Sarah, Ethan, they followed us. The back door burst open. Sarah stumbled in, her arms still bandaged. Megan behind her, breathless. Jake, they were right behind us. Before she could finish, gunfire erupted from outside. Bullets shattered the warehouse windows. One of Reed's agents was hit instantly, collapsing. The other returned fire. Cole grabbed the decoy case, darting toward the side exit. Thanks for saving me the trouble, he sneered. Jake fired, grazing Cole's shoulder. The man cursed, dropping the case as he stumbled behind a steel beam. You'll never stop it, Miller, he shouted. Then amidst the chaos, Ethan screamed. A stray bullet had struck the SUV behind them, and the boy was trapped inside. The door bent and jammed shut. Fire crackled beneath the hood where fuel leaked onto the snow. Ethan! Sarah cried, trying to run forward, but Jake caught her arm. Stay back! Rex barked furiously, bolting toward the burning vehicle. The canine slammed his body against the door, growling and clawing. Max followed, barking shrilly. Inside, Ethan kicked the window, coughing from the smoke. Rex, get him out! Jake shouted. The dog obeyed instantly, biting down on the handle, yanking until the latch gave way. The door swung open and Ethan tumbled out, Max licking his face frantically. Jake rushed forward, scooping the boy up and pulling him to safety. Cole emerged from the shadows, gun raised, aiming straight for Jake's back. But before he could fire, Reed's voice thundered. "Drop it." Cole turned, sneering. "You don't have the guts." Jake spun around at the sound, raising his weapon. The two men locked eyes across the smoky air. Years of betrayal between them. Jake's voice was steady. "You're wrong. The shot rang out." Cole staggered backward, the bullet hitting square in his chest. He fell hard against the cold concrete, breath rasping. Blood spread across his coat like dark ink. Jake approached cautiously, guns still raised. Cole coughed, a bitter smile twisting his lips. "You think it's over?" he whispered. "But there's still someone above me." His eyes glazed over. Silence filled the warehouse. Jake stood still for a long moment, then finally lowered his gun. The echo of the shot lingered like a ghost between the walls. Reed stepped forward, resting a heavy hand on Jake's shoulder. "It's done." Jake shook his head. "No, it's just begun." Behind them, Ethan clung to Sarah, Rex pressed against their legs, tail wagging weakly. Max barked once as if sensing victory but not peace. Snow drifted through the shattered windows, blanketing the warehouse floor like ash shroud. For the first time in years, Jake allowed himself a single breath of relief. But even as he did, he knew the storm hadn't truly passed. Cole's final words burned like frost in his mind. "There's still someone above me." The morning light over Maple Ridge felt different this time, softer, warmer, as if the long winter had finally taken its last breath. The snow that once sealed the town in silence had begun to melt, dripping gently from the rooftops. The world seemed to exhale, and for the first time in years, so did Jake Miller. He stood outside the courthouse steps, a simple gray coat over his shirt, his sheriff's badge tucked away in his pocket. Reporters gathered beyond the gates, cameras flashing, their questions tumbling over one another. Behind him, banners fluttered with the headline that had already made its way across the state. "Officer Jake Miller and K9 Rex expose multi-agency corruption ring." But Jake wasn't there for the fame. He wasn't even thinking about the applause. His eyes were on the woman descending the courthouse steps. Sarah now walking without the sling, her auburn hair shining in the sunlight, and a quiet smile on her lips. Beside her, Ethan trotted proudly, holding Rex's leash in one hand and Max's in the other. The boy beamed as he spotted Jake. "Dad, they said you're a hero." Jake chuckled softly, bending down to ruffle his hair. "Heroes just get lucky, kiddo. I'll take the title of Dad instead." Ethan grinned. "Well, you're both." Sarah reached them, her expression gentle but full of pride. "They reopened the Black Canyon case," she said. "The press is calling it the biggest internal cleanup in 2 decades. Captain Reed's team arrested 3 senior officers this morning. Cole's files had everything they needed." Jake nodded. "Justice finally caught up." She touched his arm lightly because you never stopped believing in it. Jake smiled faintly but didn't answer. His gaze drifted toward the distant crowd, where he spotted Megan Lewis talking to a journalist. The young nurse had traded her scrubs for a navy jacket, with the emblem of the K9 rescue unit stitched on the sleeve. She caught Jake's eye and gave him a small, reassuring nod. After the chaos of the past weeks, Megan had been offered a new role, head veterinary nurse for the K9 division. She had accepted without hesitation, saying she wanted to stay close to the ones who actually save lives. It wasn't just a career move. It was her way of keeping their unlikely little circle together. As the reporters dispersed, Jake led Sarah and Ethan toward the park across the street, where Rex and Max bounded through the slush, chasing each other across the thawing grass. The air smelled of pine and smoke, and the sunlight carried the faint promise of spring. Ethan threw a stick, and Rex leapt effortlessly to catch it midair. "He's so fast," the boy laughed. "I think he could save 100 people if he wanted." Jake smiled, watching his loyal partner run back with the stick. "Maybe we'll give him the chance," he said. "Rex and Max are going to be the first father-son K9 rescue pair this county's ever had." Sarah raised an eyebrow, amused. "You're really doing it, aren't you? Leaving the force." He turned to her, his expression softening. "Yeah, for a while. Harris called this morning. The governor wants to give me a commendation, but I told him I'm taking time off. After everything that's happened, I think it's time I learned how to live, not just survive." Sarah looked at him quietly, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "You always knew how to save everyone else. Maybe it's time you saved yourself." He laughed under his breath. "I guess I'm learning from the best." For a moment, silence fell between them, but it wasn't the heavy silence of fear anymore. It was peace filled with unspoken gratitude. Ethan ran up out of breath, cheeks flushed red. "Mom, Dad, guess what?" Sarah smiled. "What, sweetheart?" Ethan held out a small piece of paper slightly wrinkled from his pocket. It was a certificate from the courthouse, stamped and official. Name, change approved. Ethan James Miller. Jake froze, staring at the paper. His throat tightened, his voice catching as he said, "You sure about this, buddy?" Ethan nodded proudly. "I want to have the same name as my dad." Sarah's eyes shimmered with tears. "It's what he's wanted since the hospital." Jake knelt down, resting his hands on his son's shoulders. Then, "Welcome home, Ethan Miller." The boy hugged him tightly, and Jake closed his eyes, holding on as though anchoring himself to everything he'd almost lost. From nearby, Megan called out, "Hey, Sheriff." "Sorry, Exeerly. Got your new recruits ready?" Jake straightened, smiling. "I think so, but I could use someone to keep them from chewing through the training ropes." Megan grinned. "That's my department now." They watched as Rex and Max ran in circles, tails wagging, barking joyfully. Megan knelt to pat them both. "You know," she said softly, "some stories don't need perfect endings. They just need new beginnings." Jake looked at her, then at Sarah and Ethan standing together in the sunlight. "Yeah," he said quietly, "and sometimes they find you when you least expect them." Later that afternoon, Jake and Sarah returned to the small cabin at Pine Hollow. Repaired now, its roof fixed, its hearth burning warm again. It no longer felt like a place of hiding, but a home reborn. Sarah moved through the kitchen, humming as she brewed tea. Ethan sat by the window, writing in a small notebook. Rex and Max sprawled beside him. Jake stood at the doorway watching them, his badge still sat on the table, glinting faintly beside a photograph, one that Ethan had framed himself. It showed the three of them standing outside the courthouse, Rex and Max between them, snow melting under their boots. For once, Jake didn't feel the weight of the past pressing down on him. The ghosts had gone quiet. The darkness that once shadowed his every step had lifted, replaced by something he had almost forgotten how to feel. Hope. Outside, the wind carried the sound of distant church bells. Sarah joined him at the doorway, slipping her arm through his. "You did it," she whispered. "You brought us home." He looked at her, his gray eyes soft. "No," he said. "We did." From the living room, Ethan's laughter rang out as Rex knocked over a chair, and Max barked in triumph. The chaos was warm, alive, the kind of sound Jake never wanted to live without again. He turned back toward the setting sun, the horizon painted gold over the pine trees. Life had given him a second chance, not as a cop, not as a hero, but as a man, a father, and a partner, and he intended to protect it with everything he had left. It had been 1 full year since the shadows of the Black Canyon Syndicate had fallen away from their lives, and Maple Ridge had transformed beneath another winter. Thea-town, once cloaked in silence and fear, now glowed with life again. Snow drifted gently through the air, layering the rooftops in soft white. The sound of children laughing echoed faintly through the streets. For Jake Miller, the cold no longer felt like isolation. It felt like peace. He stood outside a newly built cabin nestled near the edge of Pine Hollow, its windows glowing with amber light. The small home was sturdy, built from pine wood and stone, its porch adorned with lanterns and a wooden swing Ethan had helped him hang. Smoke curled from the chimney, carrying the smell of pine and warmth into the crisp air. Beside him, Sarah stood bundled in a gray coat, her auburn hair falling loosely around her shoulders. A faint blush touched her cheeks from the cold, but her eyes held the glow of a woman reborn. No longer hiding, no longer running, she smiled softly as she watched Ethan, now 9, plant a wooden sign at the edge of the porch. The sign was hand-painted in blue letters. "Home Sweet Home." Ethan looked up proudly. "There, now it's official." Jake chuckled, brushing the snow off his jacket. "Looks perfect, kiddo." Rex and Max bounded through the snow nearby, chasing each other in circles, their fur dusted white. Rex, now 7, moved slower, but with the same fierce joy. Max, grown into a strong young shepherd, darted ahead, playful and quick. Their barks filled the air like music, echoing through the pine forest beyond. Sarah turned toward Jake, her smile softening. "You really did it," she said quietly. "You built this from nothing." Jake looked at the house, his breath visible in the chill. "Not from nothing," he said. "From everything that mattered." He reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining. The porch light reflected in her eyes. For a moment, neither spoke, the kind of silence that didn't need words. Then Jake whispered, his voice low but firm. "No more secrets." Sarah smiled, tears glimmering as she nodded. "No more running either." Inside the cabin, the glow of a fire spilled across polished wooden floors and framed photographs on the mantel. One photo showed their family standing in front of the courthouse a year earlier, smiling beneath the winter sun. Another captured Ethan laughing as Max leapt into the air. And in the center, a new picture. The one they had taken just that morning showed all 5 of them standing in front of the new house, snow falling like confetti. Above the photographs hung a small wooden frame containing two intertwined silver pendants. The twin necklaces Jake and Sarah had once worn, the same ones that had led him back to her. The metal caught the light of the fire, gleaming softly like a promise renewed. Ethan ran into the house, his cheeks flushed from the cold. "Mom, Dad, come and see." Rex and Max found something under the tree. Jake raised an eyebrow. "What is it this time? Another squirrel?" Ethan laughed. "No, it's something shiny." They followed him out to the snowy yard. The two German shepherds were pawing at the ground beneath an old oak tree, tails wagging furiously. Jake knelt beside them, brushing away snow until something metallic caught the light. It was an old sheriff's badge, weathered, half-buried, but unmistakable. Sarah looked at Jake curiously. "Yours?" He shook his head slowly, wiping the dirt from its surface. "No, it belonged to my father." His voice was quiet, distant. "He was a deputy here before I ever joined the force. I thought it was lost when his old station burned down." Sarah rested a hand on his shoulder. "Maybe it wasn't lost. Maybe it just found its way home." Jake stared at the badge for a long moment, then smiled faintly and slipped it into his pocket. "Yeah," he said softly, just like the rest of us. The sound of an approaching vehicle drifted through the cold, the low hum of an engine cutting across the snow. Jake turned to see a black SUV parking near the tree. From it stepped Captain Reed, now promoted and wearing a long navy coat with gold insignia on his shoulders. His hair had grayed slightly at the temples, but his eyes were still sharp and kind. "Thought I'd find you here," Reed called out, his breath forming clouds in the air. "I was in the area, wanted to see how the new place looks." Jake grinned. "You're just checking if I used regulation lumber." Reed smirked. "Only if you filed the paperwork." Sarah came to the porch, smiling warmly. "Captain Reed, you made it." Reed nodded politely. "Wouldn't miss it. I needed to see that this story really got its ending." His eyes softened as he looked around at the snow, the family, the two dogs playing in the yard. "Not bad, Miller. Not bad at all." Jacob shrugged modestly. "Took me long enough." Reed's voice grew thoughtful. "You know, most people who've been through what you have, they don't make it this far. But you didn't just survive, Jake. You rebuilt." Jake looked at his family again, then back at Reed. "I had help." Reed nodded approvingly. "That's good to hear because someday you might need to help someone else find their way back too." Jake smiled. "Maybe. For now, I'm happy right here." Reed gave a short laugh, turning to leave. "You've earned that, Sheriff." Jake shook his head. "Retired." "Maybe in paperwork," Reed said, grinning as he walked toward his SUV. "But not in heart." The vehicle pulled away slowly, its taillights glowing red against the snow. From the porch, Jake watched it disappear into the white horizon. Ethan tugged on his sleeve. "Dad, can we decorate the tree now?" Jake smiled. "Go ahead, partner." The boy and Sarah began hanging small wooden ornaments on the pine tree by the porch, while Rex and Max chased each other joyfully through the drifts. Jake leaned against the railing, watching them. Every laugh, every bark, every soft glow of the light stringing across the windows. He thought about everything they had endured. The fear, the betrayal, the years stolen by silence. But all of it had led here to this simple, perfect moment under the falling snow. Sarah turned, her eyes meeting his. "You're quiet," she said softly. He smiled, just remembering. "Good memories, I hope. The best kind." He wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "Because they brought me back to you." The snow fell thicker now, soft and endless. Ethan ran to them, Rex and Max bounding beside him, their fur glinting under the porch light. He wrapped his arms around both his parents, giggling as Rex licked his face. Jake laughed, his heart swelling with warmth. The world around them faded to white, a family framed against the glow of their new beginning. Inside, the fire burned bright, its light reflecting off the twin pendants hanging above the mantel. Two halves of a promise finally whole again. Outside, the two German shepherds chased each other through the drifts, barking at the falling snow, their joy echoing across the valley. A sound not of battle or survival anymore, but of life renewed. And above them all, the stars broke through the clouds, shining down on Pine Hollow like silent witnesses to the truth Jake had fought so long to find. Love, no matter how lost, always finds its way home. Sometimes miracles do not arrive as lightning from the sky, but as quiet moments of grace, a second chance, a reunion, a love once lost that finds its way home again. Just like Jake and Sarah, who found hope through pain and faith through loss, we are reminded that God's hand works in the ways we cannot see. When life feels broken, He sends light through the cracks in the form of forgiveness, courage, and the people who never stop loving us. Every act of kindness, every prayer whispered in silence becomes a seed of restoration that God can turn into a miracle. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it with someone who might need hope today. Leave a comment below. Write amen if you believe that love and faith can heal even the deepest wounds. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories that remind us of God's goodness. May the Lord bless you and your family, bring peace to your home, and fill your heart with faith that miracles still happen every single day.